Welcome back, focused learners. Grab your coffee, because today's explainer is diving straight into one of the most fascinating, kind of mind-bending enigmas sitting quietly in the shadows of the Cold War. We're looking at a Soviet diplomat named Alexei Voronov. This guy literally threw his entire career away by doing one unthinkable thing. He absolutely refused to sign the landmark 1959 Antarctic Treaty. Now you might be wondering, why on earth would a mid-level diplomat defy his own government over a massive block of uninhabited ice? Well, today we are going to unpack this mystery, detail by detail, step by step, to understand exactly why the source material proposes such a captivating and, highly controversial answer. Okay, let's dive into this. To do that, we're going to meticulously trace this historical timeline step by step. We'll start with the 1959 treaty refusal, look at the pre-treaty anomalies, dig into the secret October briefing, unpack the 1987 deathbed confession, examine decades of modern anomalies, and finally, discuss navigating an uncharted past.
So, Section 1, the 1959 treaty refusal. Let's set the stage here.
We're going to narrate the events of November 1959, exactly as they went down, step by step. It kicks off with 12 nations gathering in Washington, D.C. They're there to hammer out what everyone's calling a total triumph of Cold War diplomacy. Picture the room at the end of November. 11 of those 12 delegations have signed the agreement without a single hitch. Smooth sailing, right? But then, on the very final day, one man breaks ranks. Alexei Voronov, who is just a mid-level Soviet attaché, submits a formal written objection straight through internal Soviet channels. The fallout? It's immediate. Within 72 hours, Voronov is yanked right back to Moscow. His sudden, frankly unprecedented objection effectively ended his career on the spot, condemning him to live out the rest of his days in total enforced obscurity.
So what was he actually protesting? Well, the document he refused to sign contained exactly 46 articles. Let's walk sequentially through how these articles essentially locked down an entire continent. Step 1. The treaty heavily restricted independent scientific access. Step 2. It slapped a complete ban on all military activity and testing. And Step 3. It permanently froze all territorial claims. When you put all those steps together, they placed Antarctica under a strict legal framework that is completely unlike anything applied to any other piece of territory on Earth. Period.
Which brings us to Section 2, the pre-treaty anomalies. To really get our heads around Voronov's sacrifice, we have to take a step backward and meticulously examine the historical anomalies that led up to that 1959 treaty. Look at this first one. In 1513, an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis draws a map that actually appears to accurately show the subglacial coastline of Antarctica. Let that sink in. How on earth does a map drawn in 1513 show a topography that wasn't officially discovered by Western explorers until 1820? That's nearly 300 years later. There is no way that should be possible. Then our timeline jumps to 1946. The United States launches Operation High Jump, which is this massive military endeavor, and that is followed almost immediately by a bizarre, very public warning from Admiral Richard Byrd in 1947. Let's walk through exactly how those two mid-century events unfolded.
The sequence of Operation High Jump is, well, it's highly unusual. Step 1, the operation begins with a massive deployment heading to the bottom of the world. We're talking 4,700 men and 13 naval ships, ostensibly for a training exercise. Just to put that into perspective for you, that is a mobilization larger than the force required for many D-Day beach assaults. But then, the next event in the sequence totally defies official logic. This heavily planned 6 to 8 month mission is abruptly terminated in under 8 weeks. Just packed up and gone. Immediately after this premature return, access to Antarctica becomes heavily restricted. Acting as impartial observers here, examining this sequence step by step raises some serious questions. How does a deployment of that staggering scale, ending so abruptly, actually align with a simple training narrative?
And honestly, the abrupt end of Operation High Jump becomes even more mysterious when we look at Admiral Byrd's own reported statements. In early 1947, he told a Chilean newspaper the United States would need to defend itself against enemy aircraft flying from pole to pole at incredible speed. Now pause and think about that. To fully grasp how jarring this statement was, you have to remember that in 1947, commercial flight was barely a thing. Absolutely no nation on Earth possessed aerial technology capable of flying from pole to pole at incredible speed.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that to understand Voronov's perspective, we need to introduce a framework often referred to as the Tartarian hypothesis. We can break this down into 2 parts. First, it's the proposition that a highly advanced global civilization existed thousands of years ago but was completely wiped out by a recent catastrophic event, a reset, if you will. The second part is applying this exact framework to the anomalies found in the Antarctic ice. We're introducing this neutrally, just laying out the source material, because Voronov, who is an engineer by training by the way, firmly believed this pre-reset civilization model was exactly what he was looking at when they asked him to sign that treaty.
Let's move our step-by-step narrative forward to Section 3, the secret October briefing.
So, according to the source material, exactly 6 weeks before the treaty signing, the Soviet delegation is pulled into a secret briefing. They're shown aerial photographs provided by the Americans. And the clash of ideas here is absolutely fascinating when you view it step by step. The mainstream, official explanation presented at the briefing was basically, hey, these geometric patterns you're seeing in the ice, just natural ice compression and subglacial rock formations. Nothing to see here. But Voronov's assessment? Entirely different. Looking at the exact same photos, his trained engineering mind immediately identified architectural regularity. He saw right angles, structured grids, engineered structural patterns, stuff that nature just doesn't spontaneously carve out of a glacier.
Voronov actually pushed back against this official explanation, and this defiance led to a very private back-channel approach. In a quiet, deeply unsettling exchange away from the main delegation, a British diplomat, identified in the sources only as Charles, pulled Voronov aside. Charles reportedly confided that the treaty was essentially a containment agreement. He told him it was not what they had found that concerned them, it was the scale of it and the condition it was in. According to the sources, this exact private admission was the catalyst that pushed Voronov to file his formal written objection.
All right, let's shift our timeline forward to Section 4, the 1987 deathbed confession.
The chain of transmission for this part of the mystery happens in 3 distinct steps. First, in 1987, a dying Voronov summons his former aide, a man named Grigory Ilyich Savalev, to his Moscow apartment in the Taganka district. Step 2, this meeting turns into a meticulous 2-hour confession, which Savalev carefully writes down and then literally hides under his bed for safekeeping. Finally, Step 3, more than a decade later in 1998, a researcher locates Savalev and unearths these hidden notes through Soviet archival contacts. Now, I want to remind everyone, with a completely neutral tone here, that we are examining this timeline based strictly on these unverified archival notes.
So the crucial point is what Voronov actually meant when he reflected on that British diplomat's phrase, the condition it was in. He told Savalev that whatever the superpowers had found beneath the ice wasn't just a bunch of ancient dead ruins. He believed that whatever was down there was still, in some inexplicable sense, present. It had, in his own words, not entirely passed.
Let's bring this into the post-treaty era with Section 5, Decades of Modern Anomalies. When we walk through the modern evidence step by step, a really clear pattern emerges that actually continues to align with Voronov's claims. First off, researchers have registered anomalous, directional seismic vibrations that simply don't match standard glacial or volcanic activity. It's almost like a rhythmic pulse. Next, we can track massive, continuous financial investments pouring directly into the American McMurdo and Russian Vostok stations. Following that, you have the highly publicized 2012 breakthrough drilling deep into the subglacial Lake Vostok. And capping off this entire sequence, a highly unusual string of VIP visits in 2016 and 2017.
Let's impartially examine the data regarding Lake Vostok. The official stance is that this massive subglacial lake is kept liquid despite surface temperatures dropping to -89 degrees Celsius by standard geothermal activity. Seems plausible, right? However, the source anomaly points out that the known geothermal signature of that region is actually entirely insufficient to provide the sheer amount of thermal energy required to keep a lake of that massive size from freezing solid. On top of that, sonar mapping has reportedly shown unexplained geometric regularity on the lake floor. That's a point that gets quietly discussed in the data, but you rarely see it published in major mainstream journals.
Then, stepping through the timeline, within the span of a single year, we get this rapid-fire sequence of high-profile VIP visits. Step 1. In February 2016, Russian Orthodox Patriarch Kirill visits the continent to hold a prayer service. Step 2. By November, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry becomes the highest-ranking U.S. official to ever visit, ostensibly for climate observation. And Step 3, shortly after that, legendary astronaut Buzz Aldrin visits, only to be abruptly medically evacuated. Now, while official explanations exist for all of these, religious outreach, climate research, altitude sickness, you have to admit, their bizarre timing and sequential clustering raise some inevitable questions.
Adding even more intrigue to this sequence is a reported, later deleted tweet from Buzz Aldrin himself, sent just before his medical evacuation. It simply read, "Evil itself." Now, keeping our objective credibility here, it's important to note that while this tweet fueled massive speculation online, official channels very quickly dismissed it as the confused statement of an elderly man suffering from altitude sickness and extreme cold.
Bringing us to our conceptual conclusion. Section 6. Navigating an Uncharted Past.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why this matters to you and me. During his final hours, Voronov told his aide that the hardest part of all this wasn't the loss of his career or living out his life in obscurity. It was the terrifying realization that humanity is navigating toward a future without an accurate map of its own past. In his precise engineering mind, hiding the true origins and the actual scale of human civilization is just an inherently unstable condition for our species.
So, we'll end today's explainer with a provocative question drawn directly from the source material. Think about this. If there is truly nothing beneath the Antarctic ice except ice, rock, and natural geological formations, why build the world's most restrictive legal framework to keep people away from it? Thank you so much for joining me on this step-by-step journey, Focused Learners. Keep